Done some of these things before, and I always think of these practical sessions as a chance for maybe remind you of some things that you might not have remembered from last time, or try and show you some easier ways of going about it and some of the principles that I'm thinking about when we're doing splints. I was hoping to run through sort of the common ones that you're likely to do. So I wanted to run through a thumb spica, an ulnar gutter, and then do a Charnley splint for a distal radius. And we'll talk about anatomical moulding and also three-point moulding. So when we're looking to reduce fractures and how you're looking to apply the moulding doing the casting. A lot of the principles I'll talk about will be the same whether we're using Dynacast Prelude or plaster. But before I get into demo mode, I just wanted to just remind you of some of the differences in case you're trying to use both materials as the same, because they do the same job, but they actually operate a little differently. So when we think about plaster of Paris, which is probably the oldest technology, been around for a long time, definitely has its place. How does it react with water?
It's in a museum, isn't it? It's in a museum, yeah.
Pretty much.
Does anyone ever use it?
Hanging U slabs is probably the only place where it might be indicated. And the reason for that is because of the weight. So...
Should we not bother about plaster? Does anyone actually use it?
Well, the issue is that we actually can't use it.
Yeah, because you don't have the plastic.
We don't have the whatever the drape that you see.
All right. Well, I'll just skim over but basically just so you're aware, plaster of Paris, when it reacts with water, is absorbing the water, and it's always looking to absorb more water. So that's why if it gets into contact with water, it'll break down. So even after it's set, if you add water to it, it'll crumble and break down. But because it absorbs the water, it's heavy, and that's useful if you're doing a hanging U slab for a mid-shaft humeral fracture where you want to pull it out to length. The extra weight will actually help to distract the fracture. But apart from that, the extra weight's usually not that useful because that's harder for the patient to live with, and it makes it harder when you want to reinforce the cast because you're already limited by the bulk of what you're working with. Prelude, on the other hand, does react with water, but it's a one-way reaction. So water's just a catalyst. So it activates the resin, starts the chemical reaction, and once the reaction's finished, it'll no longer react with water. So if it gets incidentally wet, it won't break down. So I don't say it's waterproof, because waterproof relies on the padding being able to drain, but it's water resilient. So if someone gets the edges of their cast wet, which is pretty common with upper limb casts, patient doesn't have to panic and think, oh, I need to come back. They as long as the skin and the padding can dry out, they're fine. The other thing I would say is that the more water you add to Prelude, the faster it'll set. Whereas plaster of Paris, you can sort of extend the working time a little bit if you leave it wet. It's the opposite with Prelude. You don't want to add any water if you want a longer working time. And in a humid environment, you know it'll go off within 10 minutes, even if you don't add water. I think that's the main overview I wanted to point out. The other thing was plaster of Paris is 30% radiolucent, whereas Prelude's 70%. So if you're looking at X-ray without removing the splint, you're going to find it easier with Prelude. It's like looking through a fly screen. Plaster of Paris is like looking through a fog. A lot less gets through. Any questions on any of that? All pretty straightforward? Great. All right, so we're going to do a thumb spica splint first. If I was just trying to position my patient and get them comfortable, and I want to get them in a functional position, I'll often just put something in their hand, and that gets them into a functional position where the thumb's in line with the radius, and it's in opposition, which is obviously the thing that you lose when the patients are trying to help you. They often pull their hand out into that abducted position, and they want to see what you're doing. And if they stay there, they can't really use their hand, and so they'll be pretty frustrated with you. So just remember that. The other way I describe it to patients is middle finger okay, and just get patients to keep coming back to that, and always go through that before you start doing anything, that's the position you want, because they'll forget and you'll have to remind them. And so it's good to have a bit of a quick way of telling them, just give me that position again, so you can get it. I don't tend to use tape measure. I'll use my bandage to measure. Just be mindful you're not stretching it when you're measuring. if we're going to go to the tip of the thumb, and then we're looking at a couple of fingers back or 3 fingers depending on the injury. Obviously, the more distal the injury, we can probably get away with 3 fingers. Why 3 fingers? Well, 3 fingers tends to be the distance away from the elbow crease that enables the patient to be able to bend enough to eat. But how big your fingers are or my fingers, everyone's a bit different. The ultimate test is can they reach, and so you should be checking that. Check it prior and then check it when you're doing it. So that's my measure. I'm just going to duck over and cut some properly. Your waste material. So I'll just sort of run through the tips on that. So I've got my measure. I always cut it before I pull the seal off. That's not on properly, and I'll show you why. I'm going to recut that.
And you're cutting exactly to the mark, or giving it another centimetre or 2?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit longer than what I measure.
Yeah.
Just so that I've got a bit of a buffer. You can always cut a little bit off. You can't put a little bit on. You'll waste a lot less material if you do that. Now you notice I've just pushed the air out, and then I'm going to make a fold. I'm going to fold down. If I fold down, then I can just rest the clip on the bench, and it's already just one layer sitting over the clip. So the clip comes with that ridge, and you just want that fold to sit over the clip. If you put the fold in prior, it'll just sit there, and then you can just push it down. You just want to make sure that you got the end coming out all the way along, and that you push on the end in the middle. And it just takes 2 seconds, and it'll be sealed properly. If it's not, you'll find you'll have movable material at this end, but hard at the end. And the last one was done upside down, which tells me someone sort of did it in midair. And that always fraught. Like if you can just have it on the bench and push down, it'll. All those fibres of fiberglass, the amount of contact as they're woven through each other is huge, and that's what gives it strength. So it's the equivalent to 20 layers of plaster of Paris slab, and the most you'd ever do with plaster of Paris slab is 12 layers. After that, it's just too big and cumbersome to work with, and doesn't really work when you go beyond that. So it's good to know this is very strong, but as I said before, it's quite light because it's not absorbing the water. Now, when I'm making a thumb Spica splint, I just want to do a little cut off the edge. The template for a tip of the thumb, so this might be for a tendon injury, is 60 degrees, so quite a steep cut. And I'm going to cut from the side that opens. That means I've got more substrate, if that makes sense, to work with. So more material to support the thumb, because I'm wanting to wrap this around the thumb. So I'm going to just cut that 60 degree cut, and you'll notice that when I put that, just leave your thumb there, see how patient was helping me then and opening out, like we all do it. But if I wrap that around the thumb, you can see that I'm going to clear the metacarpals with that 60 degree cut when I go to the tip. Everyone can sort of see that. You can see the distal palmar crease, and that fold there automatically misses that, so the fingers will still work. If I wanted to do a to the IP joint, I'm going to just increase the angle of that cut to like 45 degree, and you'll find that at the 45, when I go a bit lower, that still clears. All right, so if you just remember 60 degrees for your tip and then 45 after that, it's just one cut, and that's all you need to do. Now with this material, because it's pre-padded, all I have to worry about now is making sure I don't have any sharp edges. At the moment, these glass fibres are soft because they haven't set yet, but when they harden, they'll be sharp. Any casting material really will be sharp, and you never really want it resting against the skin. So to fix that, we just cut back our pattern. I just open up like that, 1 centimetre, and I curve my edges. All right, so I'm just rounding everything off. So if I have curved edges, I'm good to go. At this point, I always like to just double check the length of my splint and make sure I'm pretty happy with what I've cut. And I'm pretty spot on here. I'm just going to cut back my edges again. And for the the proximal end, I'm really just thinking about a paddle pop stick as my template. If you think of that as the end of that, I had someone from, I think it was the UK the other day, didn't know what a paddle pop stick was. So, but you get the idea. I need a template in my head, but I'm just looking for that rounded shape at the end. And I've come back 1 centimetre. So when I check it, I put my hands around the padding and I can feel pretty much I've got a pad of my finger all the way around protection. I know that the patient isn't going to get irritated by the padding. Now, I left my bandage up there, sorry.
So we know you won't be irritated.
I already am.
You're quite calm the rest of the week.
I know, it sort of seems like overemphasis but this is your safety check. And you really want to just make sure you do that because the material can move in and out of the padding. I've just realised I have everything set up and I don't have my towels.
I don't have towels. I have towels.
But it's just a 90-degree turn. Pinch the bandage and then you can wrap it around the thumb and then you can straighten up and then you can come around the wrist and then you can come through the web space again. It's just a 90-degree turn of the bandage and you can fold it through and then straighten up. And then you just work your way down, doing it firm enough that you're getting the splint to conform. So we didn't activate because I spent a bit of time talking about different options. But once you've got to the end, I'll just give myself just a little bit more, just tuck that in. Don't need to use tape or anything at this stage, but what you want to focus on is your moulding at this point. And the couple of areas that you want to really think about, when you're putting on a splint, it tends to form a cylinder. And obviously the wrist isn't a pure cylinder. It's more, if you think about the AP versus the lateral view of my wrist, it's more like a rectangle. So it's definitely a lot wider on the AP view than it is on the lateral. And most wrists are like that. So you really need to flatten it. And I think of this as like the handle for the splint. If you've got a good fit here, it'll stop the splint from pistoning. Because we're doing a thumb, the other thing we want to do is make sure that we've got a good mould over the patient's thenar eminence. And so you do need to mould in here, in the hollow of the hand, and you want to mould in the anatomical snuff box. You don't want to do it together because that'll create a clamp on the radial nerve as it passes through the anatomical snuff box, and you'll give them potentially a little palsy. So you can really irritate them with that. So it feels really good to do a bikey's handshake, but you're actually going to put pressure while you're putting pressure here, and then you're squeezing them from both sides and locking it in. They will have nowhere to go. So try and do it independently. So mould with your thenar eminence or with the pads of your hands, and then your hypothenar eminence through the anatomical snuff box to get that to flatten out, and then come back here. And as I do that, I'm just feeling for how woody the material's getting. So as it goes off, it goes from being quite soft and malleable to then starts to stiffen and the rebound stops. So you're actually feeling for the rebound. So you get a couple of goes to mould this. It doesn't just, you're less likely to leave your fingerprints on the patient as you do with plaster of Paris. If you grab a plaster of Paris as it's setting, it's very easy to put dents in it and you've got to really work to try and reduce those. This is the opposite. It's more forgiving, but you have to be a bit more deliberate about where you want to get your mould. And just as it's going off, make sure you hold those positions. And so at this time, I'll be checking that the patient can oppose their fingers, and you're just checking all that, sort of your last chance. You know your length is all right. And so that's my first bandage. Once that's gone off, I'm ready to do my second bandage. And I can show you with this bandage how I would cut instead of folding. I always prefer to cut. I'm just folding today because we can just keep reusing these bandages. The reason I prefer to cut is it means you always get a nice even tension and you don't tend to get any bunching or the bandage turning into a bit of a rope, and that puts undue pressure. This second bandage is a cohesive bandage, and I recommend that because it stops the splint from moving. If a patient puts on a jumper, you can see how the bandage wants to, I'm just lightly brushing over that, and you can see that the bandage sort of wants to move and roll up. If the bandage moves, the splint will move. So while you spend all that time moulding to the millimetre, if the patient goes home, puts on a jumper, takes it off, gets in and out of bed, rests their arm on the couch and pulls it away, all those things will make the bandage move, and then the splint will move, so it won't be doing its job. If you use a cohesive bandage for your second bandage, you can sort of solve that problem. So I just untuck the end of this bandage. I hadn't taped it. I don't need to use any extra tape. I can just use this bandage, and then I can just roll this on, and you can just roll it on, anchor the bottom, and once that's done, I can work my way up the limb. I only need to get about 80%, 20% overlap, so 80% only single layer. And I can work my way up to the thumb. I can come through here, and then as I come across, I can go through the web space for the first one. So my tip for when you're going around the thumb, people can get sort of lost, where do I need to cut? If I'm going through the web space, sorry, just have to come in front of you. Always cut away from the patient. If you use the thumb as your guide and just cut on the angle of the thumb, then you'll always tend to fall into the right position. Do you see that? So I'm just following the thumb, just making sure that's not too thick and not too high there. And just coming through the web space there, and you can tuck that in and then work your way back round. And now if I'm coming up and around the thumb, I can come around the top, and I'm going to come around the back, because I'm going to go through the thumb at the top. Again, I'm using the thumb as my angle. Cut all the way up to the top. And then just lay this edge down, and then you can just feed that through and just wrap around the top of the thumb. And lay that down, and then come back around using your head of the fifth as your guide. I'm a bit high there, so I would actually just cut that and then tuck it in. So we can do that, I can show you. So if you notice something where you've done a mistake, it's okay to fix it as you go. So I come around and I can capture that, and I can come through the web space again. Sorry, I'm just having to step around so you can see it. So again, cutting right up, in line with the thumb, can lay it through. And then if I wanted to, I could do a third one around the thumb, but I'll just finish it off here. And you've always finish on a straight and on a down slope. So what I mean by that is if you can finish perpendicular, so you're not creating a big long point with the bandage that can be unravelled. And then if you cut it without any tension in it, when you flatten it out, just lay that down, you just smooth that in, and it's far less likely to come loose. And then when I rub this, it doesn't move. And when I pull on the splint, the arm moves as one, so there's no pistoning. And so it's not a lot of tension, but the second one's probably a little bit firmer than the first bandage. You obviously don't want to be affecting the circulation. You can do your circulation checks at this point, and you could re-tension the bandage if you needed to. But that's gone off, job's done, ready to move on to the next one.
Feels good.